All right, welcome to our video lecture on river basins. We are going to do our notes today. If you are in person and you have a notebook, I really suggest that you do these pencil paper. If doing them online is your only option, we have an editable copy right here. Please, again, make your own copy. Make sure you change the share settings. And then just a note, these are movable. You're going to move them where they need to be. Okay, let's get started then, shall we? So can you name all the NC river basins? Hint, there are 17. I bet you could have at least named the Cape Fear River Basin, which is what we sit in. Our Cape Fear River is right out of our backyard here at the school. You might have even been able to name the Lumber River Basin, as some of you live inside that river basin. We also have the Neuse River Basin. White Oak might sound more familiar to you. Yadkin PD probably sounds familiar to you. And then as we get in towards the mountain range, they probably don't sound as familiar to you, like the New River, the Catawba River, the Broad River, French Broad, Little Tennessee, Hiwassee, the Savannah River Basin, just a little bit of it, a little bit of the Watauga Basin, Roanoke, Chowan. You know, I try to do that one, but I can't. Pasquotank, maybe? Pasquotank, I'll look it up. And then the Palmetto. Good. So there are 17, which is an incredible number. Back where I used to live, it was in Ohio, we didn't have quite nearly as many. So the North Carolina is just full of river basins, which is awesome. We're going to be discovering all about river basins today, maybe. There we go. We're going to be discovering all about river basins today, perhaps, if my slide would like to do what it is supposed to. Not exactly what I wanted, but that is fine. All right, so rivers, here's how they work. First and foremost, pretty much they grow into be bigger. So they don't start off as a river. We usually start off as a stream, which is just runoff that begins to flow more permanently in a channel. And then as time goes on and we accumulate more water into the system, we might go from a smaller stream that will feed into a tributary. And then our tributaries even feed into rivers. So streams are typically what we call really, really small river-looking things. The whole idea is all of these are running water things, but it depends on what they feed into. So a stream will feed into a tributary, and then a tributary will feed into a river, and then a river is going to eventually flow into either a larger body of water like a lake or in the ocean itself. So it's really pretty cool there. Now when we go through rivers, I want you to try and identify the streams, the tributaries, and the rivers here. So pause the video, give yourself a second to try and identify these. I hope that you were able to identify I guess we went out of order. So I'd hope you would identify B as a stream. That small stream feeds into the tributary, C. And then I hope you were able, at the very least, to identify A as being our river. Now, the part you can't see says headwaters. So we're going to start from the very beginning of the river, and we're going to go to the very end. So what we start with is called the headwaters, and that's the beginning of our stream or river system. Typically, they're found in mountain regions. If we go back here to our Cape Fear River Basin, which is what we live in, we know that it flows this way. Our headwaters are up here in the mountains of North Carolina, right here. And all of those drain into the Cape Fear. Beautiful. The water is typically really cold because of the mountain air, and we'll talk about in Earth and Environmental that as we increase in elevation, we are decreasing in temperature. Typically, think about the mountains. The mountaintops usually have snow, just like our cute little pictures right here. But it's typically very cold. It's usually pretty oxygenated. because not a lot of organisms have taken the oxygen out of the water, like fish or plants. And it's typically pretty clear. Usually at our headwaters, we've got nice, clear, fresh water. There's not, because at the very beginning of the river, we often don't find a lot of pollutants here. The channel at the beginning of the river is typically V-shaped with really steep sides. One example of a channel with steep sides is the Grand Canyon. Okay, so that's our headwaters, our beginning. If we look at the middle, sorry, I forgot I put these questions in here. So ID the headwaters right here. Where do you think it is in the map? I hope you identified it in our nice snow-covered mountain regions. Remember, the water there is typically cold, full of oxygen, and very clear. Here's an example of maybe what that V-shaped channel might look like. It's hard to identify or imagine the channel shape of a river because it's under the water and we don't really see it, but this mountainside gives us a really good idea. It is very V-shaped, and if we were to dunk our heads underwater, we might see it V even more. The next part of our river is called the middle or the main channel. Our floodplain here is a flat area next to a river. Now, a floodplain will flood periodically, not very often, sometimes once every 100 years or 500 years or 1,000 years. It's not wise to build on a floodplain because it's prone to flooding. I know that sounds very silly and very straightforward, but oftentimes we do develop on floodplains because, one, it's very fertile land because of the sediments that are depositing there, so we often find agricultural fields here. And two, because it's a beautiful view overlooking the river. But again, it's not very wise because it is prone to flooding. The next thing we're going to define here is called a meander. And that's a bend or a curve in the stream or the channel. So you can see on our little map right here that we have identified the meanders with an arrow. If you are doing your map too, please do that as well. With your arrows, you're going to need to make more than one. And if you're doing it with paper pencil, please put some arrows in to identify our meanders. So those are curves in the stream. Our water velocity, so it'll flow faster on the outside, which will cause a cut bank, or a very steep bank. And on the inside, water's going to flow pretty slow, which might cause some sandbars. We're going to learn and we're going to talk about in depth how water flow is really dependent on, or how much sediment a river can carry is really dependent on how fast the water is flowing. So on the outside here, we've got a lot of erosion because the water's flowing very fast. That's why we get a very steep bank. And on the inside, we've got the sandbar deposition or depositing of sediments or putting down of sediments because the water is flowing very fast. Or very slow, excuse me. Slow means we have deposits. Fast means we have erosion. Erosion is defined right there for you. It's the moving of sediments from one place to another. And then a gradient, when we're talking about rivers, is the measure of change in elevation of our river, so from one point to another. And we have defined discharge here as the amount of water being carried. So if we're going to use our scientific words, I could say that we have an increase in discharge as the water flows faster, causing a lot of erosion. And the last definition, I'm sorry we got it cut off a little bit, but it's called an oxbow lake. And it's a blocked off meander. So if you look, and please draw this if you are paper pencil. If you are online, you can try to recreate it, but you might not be able to. A meander is, again, that bend in the river, but an oxbow lake happens when the river forgoes or abandons that meander. So instead of curling around like so, it's going to go straight over and create a new channel right in here. And then eventually over time sediments are going to deposit right here and right here, cutting that oxbow lake off from the river that it once was a part of. These are pretty common here, especially in North Carolina. You can see them, and the older a river is, the more meanders it's going to have and the more oxbow lakes it's going to have. So a really mature river will have several oxbow lakes along its floodplain. Okay, I do the floodplain. What do you think it is? The floodplain, again, is wherever a river, or where pretty much area close to the river. If you think about the Nile River, the ancient Egyptians kind of capitalized on that floodplain by putting their agriculture fields there because they knew it was going to flood eventually. And while flooding is bad for structures, it often deposits a lot of sediments and nutrients into the soil. So it made it really fertile and really good for farming. So the ancient Egyptians took advantage of this and planted their fields along the Nile River. And that was one way they were able to survive in the otherwise desert-like conditions of Egypt. Here we've got an example of a river. See the river right here? It's got a nice big meander. Means it's probably a pretty old, pretty mature river. We've got, if it were to cut off right here and abandon that channel, it would be, this part would become an oxbow lake. And you even see right here, farmers have taken advantage of the fertile soil surrounding that floodplain and planted their crops. And this possibly might even be fields right here, but these are for sure fields. Seeing this picture, what part of the Cape Fear River do you think Emeru is on? I hope you've identified that Emeru is at least in the middle of the Cape Fear River, so our middle region. And I hope you tell me that maybe the Cape Fear River is a pretty mature river. And I don't think you would identify Emeru as being in the floodplain of the Cape Fear River, although it is pretty close. And lastly, we come to the very end of our river, which is called the mouth. Sometimes at the end of our river, a delta can form, which is a triangular deposit at the mouth. So deposit here is referring to the dropping of sediments at the end of the river. So you remember how we talked about, again, we'll talk about this in Earth and Environmental, but as the river flows, it picks up sediment, and the faster it goes, the more sediment it can carry. As streams slow down, they lose their ability to carry sediments because they are slowing down and losing energy. So as my stream, the water from my stream all of a sudden comes up on an ocean or a lake, which is a non-moving body of water typically, even though the ocean is having the waves, typically it's not considered free-flowing. So as it hits that large body of water, the molecules of water that were going really, really fast and carrying all that sediment come to a sudden stop, or at least a sudden slowdown. And with that slowdown, we often find that the sediments, it just can't carry them anymore, so what does it do? It drops it. And that's why we have deltas form at the mouth of a river. One of the most famous deltas is the Birdfoot Delta off the ocean side, or the Gulf of Mexico side of the Mississippi River. And it's so large that many animals have created habitats there. They're typically pretty nutrient-rich places, so you've got a lot of plant life, a lot of animal life, especially if it's lower down, you might have a lot of fish. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is pollution. Pollution generally of a river comes from somewhere upstream, and because of that, the end is almost always more polluted than the beginning of the river, because if you think about it and you look at a diagram of a river, let's look at one real quick. So right here, and you've even got some deltas right here, and meanders and an oxbow lake. But right here is typically a lot more polluted than areas upstream like here and here. If you think about it, water we talked about is a universal solvent, so it has the ability to pick up things, and it picks up any kind of pollutants as it moves along. So this water has a lot more chance of being polluted than this water, because simply it passes more human things, whether that be factories, homes, houses, agriculture, you name it, it probably pollutes the river. There's the end of our Cape Fear River going out into the island, and you can bet that there is, at the very least right here, a nice delta. Alright guys, enjoy. I hope you had a great lecture. I'll talk to you next time.